this is Mission Control Houston. Good morning. Today is Tuesday, June 14th, 2016. We are live here in the International Space Station Flight Control Room at the NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, awaiting the release of the Cygnus cargo vehicle to conclude Orbital ATK's OA-6 commercial resupply mission. Leading the flight control team here today is Flight Director Gary Horlocker. Next to him, the voice between the ground here and the International Space Station, the Capcom, Hal Getzelman. Over in Dulles, Virginia, leading the team at the Orbital ATK Mission Control Center, Mission Director Tony Foti. The Cygnus cargo vehicle is now in position, relying on internal power for the remainder of its mission, scheduled for a release 30 minutes from now, 8:30 a.m. Central Time. Now in the cupola workstation of the International Space Station, NASA astronaut Tim Kopra as the prime robotic arm operator for today's release, and European Space Agency astronaut Tim Peake as his backup. Kopra will be sending the command at 8:30 to release the Cygnus.
Houston Station on Space to Ground 2 for Cygnus release. The Cygnus release review is complete.
Copy, review complete.
A recap of some of the activities yesterday and this morning. Yesterday morning, they closed the hatch after loading all of the disposal cargo into the Cygnus vehicle, and after depressurization early this morning, Tim Kopra began sending the commands to unbolting shortly after 6 a.m. Central Time today. Ground controllers then detached the Cygnus at 6:43 a.m. Central Time and maneuvered it to its release position, where it remains right now with 4,087 pounds of disposal cargo. In just about 7 minutes, flight controllers here will be giving the go, no-go for release and departure of the Cygnus vehicle at 8:30 a.m. Central Time. This will begin shortly after an orbital sunrise. A minute after its release at 8:30 a.m., we'll begin the first depart burn and attitude maneuver at 8:31 a.m. Central Time. This will be a 3-minute burn to conclude at 8:34. 10 seconds later, the Cygnus vehicle will exit the keep out sphere, meaning that it will be out of range for the crew to send commands to the vehicle. From there, it will drift away from station 17 minutes later, exiting the approach ellipsoid. And this will mark the ceased joint operations between Orbital ATK and NASA, and Orbital ATK over in Dulles, Virginia, will take over operations for the remainder of its flight. After exiting the approach ellipsoid, the Cygnus cargo vehicle will be on an 8-day free flight until its fiery re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere on June 22nd. It'll start re-entry delta velocity burns to slow down and allow gravity to pull the vehicle down into Earth's atmosphere at 7:45 a.m. Central Time on June 22nd. 20 minutes later, it will experience 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit as it re-enters the Earth's atmosphere over the South Pacific Ocean. And 50 minutes from that final burn until it impacts in the remote parts of the South Pacific. The Orbital ATK OA-6 mission launched on March 23rd of this year from Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida aboard an Atlas V rocket. It arrived 3 days later, March 26th, to the International Space Station with over 7,500 pounds of cargo for its 3-month stay aboard the International Space Station. The vehicle was named the SS Rick Husband in honor of the deceased astronaut. NASA astronaut Rick Husband flew 2 space flights, one STS-96 as the pilot in 1999. This was the mission that was the first docking of the space shuttle to the International Space Station and delivered 4 tons of logistics and supplies in preparation for the arrival of the very first expedition, Expedition 1, to live on the station the following year. The mission was accomplished in just under 10 days. Rick Husband later served as commander of STS-107, a 16-day flight dedicated to science and research. The crew worked 24 hours a day, alternating sleep shifts, and conducted a total of 80 experiments in those 16 days. Upon re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere on February 1st, 2003, the Space Shuttle Columbia and its crew tragically perished. Rick Husband lost his life along with 6 other crew members on STS-107. In addition to 4,087 pounds of trash about to be released in just about 24 minutes, will be a series of experiments that will be conducted after joint operations cease between NASA and Orbital ATK. Just about 4 hours after departure, ground controllers will begin operations for the Sapphire experiment. This is the spacecraft fire experiment out of the Glenn Research Center in Cleveland, Ohio. This experiment has the goal of determining how fire propagates without the effects of gravity, how large it gets, and how fast it spreads. The goal of this study is to improve spacecraft design and safety. There have been previous combustion experiments before on the International Space Station, but those have been limited to a small sample size, about 4 inches squared. The sample in the Cygnus cargo vehicle is 1 foot by 3 foot, and is a blend of cotton and fiberglass. It will be ignited inside a specially built enclosure that's packed inside Cygnus once it's a safe distance away from the International Space Station, again, just about 4 hours after departure. The sample will be remotely ignited from Orbital ATK flight controllers in Dulles, and from then on the experiment will run autonomously. Sensors from within the enclosure will gather data and also high-definition video. We'll be able to see that video no earlier than tomorrow, June 15th. In addition, a series of 5 CubeSats will be deployed from the Cygnus cargo vehicle. Historically, CubeSats are deployed from the International Space Station. There's a special deployer that gets put out the airlock in the Japanese module. These CubeSats will be adding to the Lemur constellation, an existing constellation of many satellites, as a tech demonstration for maritime and weather observations and monitoring ships that cross the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans for global trade. These CubeSats will be deployed on Monday, June 20th. The final experiment will be the Reber experiment. This is the re-entry breakup recorder that will occur in its last moments before its fiery re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere. As it re-enters, the Reber experiment will gather temperature and acoustic data from Cygnus until its fiery demise. Then right as Cygnus is breaking up, Reber makes a satellite phone call on the Iridium network to transmit the data to researchers on the ground. Understanding how cargo vehicles break up in the Earth's atmosphere could lead to better spacecraft design and safety. Now standing by for flight controllers here at the NASA Johnson Space Center to give the no-go for release, scheduled still at 8:30 a.m. Central Time. Flight controllers here are scheduled for go, again, for an on-time release of the Cygnus cargo vehicle at 8:30 a.m. Central Time.
Station, Houston, Space Ground 2, go to check Cygnus configuration per step 1 in 1.602 Cygnus departure monitoring.
Copy, Houston, that's in work.
Ground controllers here will continue to monitor Cygnus until it's released at 8:30 a.m. Central Time. NASA astronaut Tim Kopra and Tim Peake in the cupola workstation getting ready for its release to send the command to the robotic arm for its release at 8:30 a.m. Central Time. Once it's released, it will slowly drift away from station until about 8:52 a.m. Central Time, where it will pass the approach ellipsoid, and this will cease joint operations between NASA and Orbital ATK.
Complete, and the crew is ready for release and departure.
Stand by for release.
Controllers and the astronauts on board now standing by for release, again on time, 8:30 a.m. Central Time. Once joint operations end at 8:52 a.m. Central Time today, Orbital ATK mission controllers in Dulles, Virginia, will take over for a series of experiments over the next 8 days. Last week I had the pleasure of talking with Holly Vavrin, the International Space Station program's flight lead for this Cygnus mission. She talked about some of the experiments on board the International Space Station, on board the Cygnus cargo vehicle, including the Sapphire fire experiment, the Reber breakup recorder, and some of the CubeSats. We'll play a clip of that interview shortly here to give you an inside look as to more detail about these experiments. And joining us this morning to talk about some of those things coming up is Holly Vavrin, the International Space Station program's flight lead of the Cygnus mission. Thank you, Holly, for being here.
Happy to be here.
All right, so tell me, would you say this mission has gone pretty much according to plan so far?
It's been essentially flawless. All of the Cygnus subsystems have performed nominally. This is the second flight of the enhanced Cygnus spacecraft, and so with the changes that have been made incrementally over time, it just really proves how reliable the spacecraft design is. We're really happy with the performance.
So it's going to be taking about 4,400 pounds of trash and other things away from station. What kinds of trash is it going to be taking away?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, Cygnus undergoes a destructive reentry. That means it burns up in the atmosphere, and so that's a really effective way of getting rid of trash and broken or obsolete hardware that we no longer need on station. And so we've got, as I mentioned, some hardware, broken hardware, obsolete hardware. We have dirty laundry, food canisters, and of course smelly waste items. So we're basically a big garbage truck, but it's a very important aspect to supporting station operations.
It's better than keeping it on the station
Absolutely.
for 6 months. So on its way down, it's not only carrying trash, it's carrying some experiments. It's going to be deploying some satellites and play host to what's described as, I guess, a large fire. So tell me about these events and how you're going to get the data from the fire experiment Sapphire.
Okay, so on Tuesday the 14th, Cygnus will depart from space station, and about 4 hours after departure, we'll begin the Sapphire operations. That is the spacecraft fire experiment that is run out of the Glenn Research Center. And so the goal is to understand how fire propagates without the effects of gravity. So we're going to answer questions like how large does a fire get, how fast does it spread, and this information will help us improve future spacecraft designs, especially for long-duration missions. There have been previous combustion experiments performed in space and on the space station, but those experiments have been limited to samples that are 4 inches square or less. So an unmanned cargo craft like Cygnus is ideal for large-scale combustion experiments without posing any risk to ISS or crew. So in Cygnus, there's a 1 foot by 3 foot material sample. It's a cotton fiberglass blend located inside a specially built enclosure that's inside the pressurized section of Cygnus. And so after departure, the Orbital ATK flight controllers from their Dulles, Virginia facility will remotely ignite the sample. We're going to get a lot of data from sensors that are placed throughout the vehicle and high-def video. That's what we're most excited to see, how the fire behaves in space. That'll be downlinked via ground station over the next few days so researchers can study it.
Awesome.
In addition, there will be some CubeSat deployments. This is the first use of the NanoRacks CubeSat deployer to deploy small satellites from Cygnus. Historically, we've used the Japanese airlock on station to deploy satellites, but now we have the ability to deploy from a free-flying vehicle. So there are 5 Spire Lemur satellites on this vehicle. They've got technology demonstrations and maritime and weather observation platforms, and those will be deployed on Wednesday morning.
And those CubeSats, the weather operations for ships and boats, correct?
Yes, right? Monitoring, yes.
Excellent. So those are the 2 experiments. We have the Sapphire, we have some of the CubeSats. We also have the Reber, the destructive reentry. It's going to be looking at some of that data. So tell me, what would be measured and what's the value of knowing the specifics of how the vehicle is destroyed on reentry?
Okay, so on June 22nd, Cygnus will begin its fiery demise. And so the reentry breakup recorder is a payload that was designed by the Aerospace Corporation and flown under the direction of the DoD Space Test Program. And that payload will record temperature and acoustic measurements from inside the spacecraft. This data is collected, sent to a mother unit also inside the vehicle, and then as the Cygnus vehicle is breaking up, the Reber unit makes a satellite phone call through the Iridium network to transmit that data to researchers on the ground. And the data that we're obtaining is really crucial to understanding how spacecraft behave during reentry, and this will allow us to improve future spacecraft designs.
Excellent. So we have all of these experiments, and then it departs on June 14th, and then begins its destructive reentry 8 days later on June 22nd. After that, are there more Cygnus cargo ships on the agenda for this year?
Absolutely. Teams are busy. The OA-5 mission is coming up. That'll be the Antares launch vehicle return to flight. Orbital ATK recently completed a very important milestone leading up to that launch. It was a hot fire test of the first stage. Got a picture up, looks like, of how that went. Very successful. Specialists will be reviewing data over the next couple of weeks, but in the meantime, the Cygnus vehicle for the OA-5 mission is at the launch site, and we're very much looking forward to launching from the Wallops Flight Facility. In addition, there's another Orbital ATK mission planned for later this year called OA-7, and preparation is underway for that mission as well.
Plenty of cargo going up and down. We're very excited for the return to flight and all. Holly, thank you for being with us today. Again, on June 14th, the Cygnus cargo vehicle is going to be departing from the station, and we'll be providing some NASA TV coverage starting at 8 a.m. Central Time, it'll depart at 8:30 a.m. Central Time. So again, Holly, thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Great, best of luck to you.
Go Cygnus.
Again, that interview with Holly Vavron was recorded last Thursday, June 9th. Right now, the International Space Station is just about 260 statute miles above the South Pacific Ocean, about to hit the western border of Chile. Cygnus and the International Space Station are encountering an orbital sunrise. This is the marker for the window open for the planned Cygnus release again at 8:30 a.m. Central Time. Minutes to release until the Cygnus cargo vehicle is released from the International Space Station.
Time at 13:30 GMT. Steps 2 through 4 in 1.320. The release window closes at 14:03 GMT.
Copy, Houston. Go for release on time, 13:30.
Confirmation from Tim Copra on board the International Space Station. Go for release on time, 8:30 a.m. Central Time. The window that Capcom Hal Getzelman was describing is about 35 minutes, 50 seconds, kind of the extent of the available sunlight that they'll be having during the release window. A recap of some of the events that'll happen right after release. Again, release 8:30 a.m. Central Time. 1 minute later, we'll begin the depart burn and attitude maneuver, 8:31 a.m. Central Time. This will be a 3-minute burn to drift slowly away from the International Space Station until it exits the keep out sphere at 8:34 a.m. Central Time. And this will be the marker that commands will no longer be able to be sent from Tim Copra in the Cupola workstation to the Cygnus vehicle. "17 minutes later, 8:51 a.m. Central Time, the Cygnus will exit the approach ellipsoid, and this will cease the joint operations between flight controllers here at NASA and flight controllers in Dulles, Virginia at the Orbital ATK Mission Control Center. From then on, flight controllers in Dulles will take over operations for the next 8 days, where it will be in free flight around the Earth until its fiery reentry 8 days later on June 22nd. Just about 7 minutes until the Cygnus cargo vehicle is released to conclude its near 3-month journey aboard the International Space Station. Again, it launched on March 23rd from the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station aboard an Atlas V rocket and arrived on March 26th with over 7,500 pounds of cargo. A good view of Cygnus as we're 259 statute miles above the west coast of Chile, now in orbital light. This vehicle for Orbital ATK's OA-6 mission is called the SS Rick Husband, after the deceased NASA astronaut. NASA astronaut Rick Husband flew 2 space flights, one STS-96 as the pilot in 1999, where he and his crew performed the first docking of the space shuttle to the International Space Station and delivered 4 tons of logistics and supplies in preparation for the arrival of the first crew, the Expedition 1 crew, to live on the station the following year in November of 2000. The mission was complete in just under 10 days. He also served as commander of STS-107, a 16-day flight dedicated to science and research, and he and his crew worked 24 hours a day, alternating sleep shifts, and conducted 80 experiments over those 16 days. Upon re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere at February 1st, 2003, Space Shuttle Columbia and its crew tragically perished. Rick Husband lost his life along with 6 other crew members of STS-107. A good view of Cygnus, scheduled for release in just under 5 minutes, now 250 statute miles over Chile. 4 minutes until Cygnus release. Tim Coper standing by in the cupola workstation as the prime robotic arm operation for this mission, with a good view of Cygnus ready for release on time, 8:30 a.m. Central Time. You're getting a look at the Cygnus cargo vehicle in its release position. The hatch was closed yesterday morning, and after depressurization early this morning, Coper began sending commands to unbolt shortly after 6 a.m. Central Time this morning. Ground controllers detached the cargo vehicle at 6:43 a.m. Central Time and maneuvered it to the release position where it remains right now with 4,087 pounds of disposal cargo. Now 3 minutes until scheduled release. Two minutes until release as the International Space Station flies 256 statute miles over the center of Argentina. Less than 1 minute till release, NASA astronaut Tim Coper standing by in the cupola workstation as the prime robotic arm operator for this mission, ready to send the command for release. At 8:30 a.m., 254 miles over southern Paraguay, the Cygnus cargo vehicle has been released from the International Space Station. Now in just about 20 seconds, schedule the first departure burn to start drifting slowly away from the International Space Station. clear departure motion as the Cygnus cargo vehicle drifts slowly away from the International Space Station. Separation is clear. The Ultraflex solar array is now coming into view from the view of the camera on the end of the robotic arm of the International Space Station. Now just under 254 statute miles over Brazil.
Station on space to ground 2 for Cygnus release. The Cygnus abort command has been completed, and we're go to re-enable ISS thrusters.
(8:34 a.m. Central Time). The Cygnus is just started its departure burn, now drifting away from the International Space Station.
In 1.602.
Copy, that's in work.
Good view of Cygnus so far, drifting slowly away from the International Space Station. 2 minutes left of this departure burn. Flight controllers here reporting the burn so far looks good. Looks just good. Departure burn still looking good, just about 1 minute until the Cygnus crosses the keep out sphere. This will cease the time that the prime robotic arm operator, Tim Coper, will be able to send commands to the Cygnus cargo vehicle. Now 251 statute miles, passing over the east coast of Brazil, heading over the Atlantic Ocean. Cygnus cargo vehicle just about to exit the keep out sphere.
Stationed on Space to Ground 2 for Cygnus release. We show that Step 3 in the Cygnus departure and monitoring is complete, and we're going to Step 5 for SSRMS cleanup.
And Cygnus departure burn complete. Safe SSRMS for Step 5 in 1.320.
That call from station concludes the operations from the cupola workstation. Tim Kopra.
We are safe now. We also wanted to congratulate the entire Cygnus team for a very successful mission of the SS Rick Husband, and as the Expedition 47 crew has noticed, we are very grateful that we've had the supplies and the science to sustain our mission here on the International Space Station. So thanks again.
Thanks for those words, Tim, and thanks for a good job today.
Likewise, we really appreciate the support in Houston. Thank you.
Congratulatory words from Prime Robotic Arm Operator for this mission, Tim Kopra, out of the cupola workstation. That will cease operations from their end as the Cygnus cargo vehicle passed the keep out sphere, and Tim Kopra no longer has the ability to send commands to the Cygnus cargo vehicle.
Station, Cygnus has exited the 200-meter keep out sphere.
Copy. Thank you.
In the meantime, Tim Kopra and Tim Peake beginning to clean up some of the activities from their operations using the robotic arm. Still in joint operations between NASA and the Orbital ATK Mission Control Center in Dulles, Virginia. It'll remain that way until the Cygnus crosses the approach ellipsoid. This will mark the end of the operations, joint operations between flight controllers here in Houston, Texas, and in Dulles, Virginia with Orbital ATK. Orbital ATK's OA-6 mission, the Cygnus cargo vehicle drifting away from station with 4,087 pounds of disposal cargo. The vehicle was released on time at 8:30 a.m. Central Time, 254 miles over over southern Paraguay. At 8:34 a.m. Central Time began the first departure burn, where it burned for 3 minutes and exit the keep out sphere, where Tim Kopra was no longer able to send commands to the Cygnus cargo vehicle. "17 minutes after the end of that burn, the vehicle will exit the approach ellipsoid and cease joint operations between Orbital ATK and NASA. Orbital will take over from there. After ceasing joint operations, the Cygnus cargo vehicle will enter an 8-day free flight until its fiery reentry into the Earth's atmosphere on June 22nd. On the morning of June 22nd, it will start re-entry delta velocity burns to slow down and allow gravity to pull the vehicle down into the Earth's atmosphere at 7:45 a.m. Central Time. 20 minutes later, it will experience 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit as it re-enters the atmosphere over the South Pacific Ocean. 50 minutes later, from that final burn, it will impact in remote parts of the ocean. Once joint operations cease between Orbital ATK and NASA, Orbital ATK will conduct a series of experiments over its 8-day free flight until its fiery reentry on June 22nd. Just about 4 hours after departure, we'll begin the first operations for the first experiment for an experiment called Sapphire, spacecraft fire. This is an experiment out of the Glenn Research Center in Cleveland, Ohio. For this experiment, they will set fire to a large sample to determine how fire propagates without the effects of gravity, how large that fire gets and how fast it spreads. The goal of this study will be to improve spacecraft design. There have been previous combustion experiments conducted on the International Space Station, but because they were in the habitable environment, were limited to a small sample size, about 4 square inches. The sample that they will be conducting for the Sapphire experiment is quite large, 1 foot by 3 foot sample of a blend of cotton and fiberglass inside a specially built enclosure that's packed inside the Cygnus cargo vehicle. Again, later today, just about 4 hours after departure, this sample will be remotely ignited from Orbital ATK flight controllers in Dulles, Virginia. Once it's ignited, sensors from within the enclosure will begin to gather data. And there's also the available high-definition video that will be collected throughout the experiment's run. Just about 7 p.m. tonight, we'll begin downlinking that data, and we'll continue to downlink over the next few days. We'll be able to see some of the footage, some of the high-definition footage of that experiment run no earlier than tomorrow, June 15th. In addition, the Cygnus cargo vehicle will be deploying a series of 5 CubeSats. These are historically deployed from the International Space Station. There is a special deployer that sent out the airlock of the Japanese module. These satellites will be lemur satellites, adding to the existing constellation, providing a tech demonstration and maritime and weather observation and monitoring. It will monitor the weather and track some of the ships crossing for the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean for global trade. These 5 satellites will be deployed on Monday, June 20th. On June 22nd, upon its fiery re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere, there will be one final experiment conducted, the REBER experiment, re-entry breakup recorder, that will gather temperature and acoustic data from the Cygnus cargo vehicle as it's being destroyed in the Earth's atmosphere. Right as Cygnus is breaking up, REBER will make a satellite phone call to transmit some of the temperature and acoustic data from the orbital re-entry and send it to researchers on the ground. The International Space Station now crossed the Atlantic Ocean, zooming around the Earth every 90 minutes at 17,000 miles per hour, now 251 statute miles, just about to hit the west coast of Africa. In just about 5 minutes, the Cygnus cargo vehicle that departed at 8:30 a.m. Central Time this morning will exit the approach ellipsoid. And this will cease joint operations between flight controllers here at NASA and flight controllers in Dulles, Virginia at the Orbital ATK Flight Control Center. can see a tiny glimpse of the Cygnus cargo vehicle far away from the International Space Station. Again, it will exit the approach ellipsoid in just about 4 minutes 30 seconds, and Orbital ATK will take over control from there. A recap of some of the activities for release yesterday. After packing the cargo vehicle with 4,087 pounds of disposal cargo, the hatch was closed early yesterday morning. The cargo vehicle was depressurized early this morning, and Copra began sending commands to unbolt the vehicle shortly after 6 a.m. Central Time this morning. Ground controllers then detached the vehicle at 6:43 a.m. Central Time and maneuvered it for release. The release of the Cygnus cargo vehicle went as expected, scheduled for an 8:30 a.m. Central Time release. Released just at that time, 254 miles above the Earth, above southern Paraguay. At 8:34 a.m. Central Time, conducted a successful departure burn away from the International Space Station and crossed the keep-out sphere, where Tim Copra, operating the robotic arm from the cupola workstation on the International Space Station, was no longer able to send commands to the Cygnus cargo vehicle. Now just under the 3-minute mark for exiting the approach ellipsoid to cease joint operations between NASA and flight controllers at Orbital ATK's Flight Control Center in Dulles, Virginia. A good view of the Earth's horizon as the International Space Station zooms around the Earth at 17 miles an hour, 252 statute miles, just above the southern coast of Spain, about to head into the Mediterranean Sea. The Strait of Gibraltar in clear view from the International Space Station, 252 statute miles above the Earth. Now just about 40 seconds until the Cygnus cargo vehicle exits the approach ellipsoid. This will cease joint operations between flight controllers here at NASA and flight controllers, Orbital ATK flight controllers in Dulles, Virginia.
Thanks, Al.
The Cygnus cargo vehicle has exited the approach ellipsoid, 8:51 a.m. Central Time. Joint operations between flight controllers here at NASA Johnson Space Center and flight controllers in Dulles, Virginia have now ceased. Orbital ATK will take over the Cygnus mission from here on. Here's a shot of the Flight Control Center in Dulles, Virginia, where Mission Director Tony Foti, is taking control of the Cygnus mission from now on. Now that Orbital ATK has taken control of the Cygnus cargo vehicle, it will begin its 8-day free flight around the Earth, conducting a series of experiments before its fiery re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere on June 22nd above the South Pacific Ocean. In just about 4 hours, it will begin its first experiment called Sapphire. This is a spacecraft fire experiment out of the Glenn Research Center in Cleveland, Ohio. And this experiment will help determine how fire propagates without the effects of gravity, how large a fire gets, and how fast it spreads in a spacecraft. There have been previous combustion experiments before, but those have been limited to a small sample size since they've been in the habitable volume of the International Space Station. Now in the Cygnus cargo vehicle safely away from the station, the Sapphire experiment is quite large, 1 foot by 3 foot sample, a blend of cotton and fiberglass. In just about 4 hours it will be ignited inside a specially built enclosure within Cygnus. Orbital ATK flight controllers in Dulbus, Virginia will remotely ignite the sample, and sensors from within the enclosure will gather data and also high-definition video. At 7 p.m. tonight, they will start downloading the data from the Cygnus cargo vehicle. We'll be able to see that footage no earlier than tomorrow, June 15th. Successful release of the Cygnus cargo vehicle to conclude the Orbital ATK OA-6 mission that launched March 23rd of this year.
Yeah, go
A recap of some of the activities that just occurred. Yesterday morning, the hatch closed after loading 4,087 pounds of disposal cargo into the Cygnus vehicle. The vehicle was depressurized early this morning, and Cobra began sending commands to unbolt shortly after 6 a.m. Ground controllers detached the Cygnus cargo vehicle at 8:43 a.m. Central Time and maneuvered it into its release position.
Takes a long time too.
It was released right on time at 8:30 a.m. Central Time.
Okay, we copy, and our experts heard it as well. So,
Thank you.
okay, so we'll try our next set of actions to see if we can get that fixed.
Again, I really appreciate it.
After Cygnus's release at 8:30 a.m. Central Time, 254 miles above the southern Paraguay, it began its first depart burn at 8:34 a.m. Central Time. The vehicle is now a safe distance away from the International Space Station, exiting the keep-out sphere and approach ellipsoid. Joint operations between NASA and Orbital ATK have ceased, and the Cygnus cargo vehicle is now on an 8-day free flight around the Earth until its re-entry on June 22nd, conducting a series of experiments. Prime Robotics operator, NASA astronaut Tim Kopra, and his backup, European Space Agency astronaut Tim Peake, have concluded operations in the Cupola workstation for the release of the Cygnus cargo vehicle. It took up the majority of their day. In the meantime, plenty of science that have been conducted. Kopra with the microbiome experiment, Tim Peake cleaning out the 3D printer, and Jeff Williams busy working on the oxygen regeneration system and conducting a series of vision tests. You can follow updates of this mission and other activities on the International Space Station by following the International Space Station blog and the pages on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can ask any question you'd like using the hashtag AskNASA. This is Mission Control, Houston.